Hello, this is Sky News Today. It's 1 o'clock. These are our headlines. The Ukrainian city of Kyiv comes under attack as the Interior Minister says dozens are killed in rocket strikes there. Russian nuclear forces are put on enhanced combat duty despite peace talks beginning on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. The human face of war, Polina and her parents, among more than 100 civilians killed so far in the conflict.
Between Thursday morning and last night, our office has recorded 406 civilian casualties, including 102 killed, including 7 children, and 304 injured.
More than 500,000 people have now crossed the border from Ukraine to escape the fighting. The Russian ruble falls to an all-time low as Britain sanctions Russia's central bank. Whilst the average UK petrol prices hit another record high. Hello, good afternoon. A Ukrainian official has said this lunchtime that dozens of people have been killed in rocket strikes on the country's second city, Kyiv. Delegations from Ukraine and Russia are currently sitting down for talks after a weekend of soaring tensions. Despite that, in the last few minutes, Russia's Interfax news agency has reported that Russia's nuclear forces have been placed on enhanced combat duty, in line with an order over the weekend from the country's President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, the United Nations says it's recorded more than 100 civilian deaths, including 7 children, and more than 300 people injured since Russia began its attack on Ukraine last week. Well, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is in Kyiv. And Deborah, what are we able to glean about what is happening in Kyiv?
Well, it seems that city, it's Ukraine's second largest city in the east of the country, has been subjected to a heavy bombardment of rocket fire. And like you said, the Interior Ministry is putting the casualty toll at dozens dead, hundreds wounded. We wait to see what the final confirmation is on those figures. But the images that you can see now on your screen, the sound of the heavy strikes, the smoke rising up, it looks like a punishing onslaught onto the city by Russian forces who, let's not forget, have yet to take a major city in day 5 of this invasion, clearly not going to plan in terms of the advances they had been expecting. And that city, Kyiv, is significant for Russia's operation. They were battling in the streets with Ukrainian forces yesterday, trying to seize control, but the Ukrainians saying towards the end of the day that Ukraine remained in control of the city. And so it would seem, and this is in line with what Western officials have previously suggested might happen, that when the Russian military fails to make the advances it had hoped to make just using its more conventional firepower, it would escalate the violence, use a greater volume of strikes onto a target, which does seem to be the case in terms of what we're seeing in Kyiv. And it's important as well to remember that onslaught has happened as these talks are underway between Ukrainian and Russian officials up on the Ukraine-Belarus border, the first talks since this conflict began. And also as this capital city, Kyiv, where I'm standing, remains as well on heightened alert, with Russian forces still not penetrating overtly into the city, but there have been clashes in the streets. We've heard gunfire, not so far, I must admit, in the last few hours, but there are still air raid sirens, and there have been explosions and attacks, missile strikes on apartment buildings, terrifying for people who have been forced to shelter in metro stations and underground basements. And just to give you a final sense of the human impact of this conflict, I was taken today as part of a media trip. We were taken to the main children's hospital here in Kyiv, and it's a hospital which has got high-tech facilities to help the sickest children, the poorest little ones, the children who are suffering from illnesses like leukemia, children who need dialysis. And the doctors there looked exhausted. They said to me that they have 2 big big challenges. First of all, how to look after very sick children in a war zone where there's explosions outside, artillery fire, he said as well, one doctor outside. They had to take the children into the basement, and then also dealing with children impacted by the war. They said they've had 3 casualties so far of children.
OK, thanks very much, Deborah. Well, let's take a look at today's other developments. The United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 500,000 people have now fled Ukraine into neighbouring countries. The Ukrainian delegation is currently at the border with Belarus for talks with Russian representatives. The Ukrainian presidency says they'll work on achieving an immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian forces. The Russian currency, the ruble, has sunk to an all-time low following tough sanctions imposed on the country. Russia's central bank has raised interest rates to 20% in a bid to combat rising inflation and shore up the currency. And a spokesperson for the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich, who owns the Premier League club Chelsea, say that he has accepted a Ukrainian request to help negotiate an end to the conflict. Well, coming up, we'll hear from our correspondents in Moscow, Washington, Brussels and on the Polish border with Ukraine, where thousands of refugees are continuing to cross. But first, these are the latest pictures of those talks taking place at the border with Belarus.
Dear friends, President of Belarus asked me to meet you, to welcome you and to ensure the comfort of your work. And as you can feel completely safe here. This is our duty. President Lukashenko sincerely hopes that in the course of today's negotiations, you'll be able to resolve everything. And all people of Belarus pray for this. And we are waiting for the results.
Well, a short time ago, Ukraine's President Zelensky made an address and called on the EU to admit Ukraine under a new special procedure.
We ask the European Union to admit Ukraine immediately under a new special procedure. We are grateful to our partners for fighting with us, but our goal is to be together with all Europeans, and the main thing, to be on equal terms. I'm convinced that this is just. I am certain that we have earned this. I am certain that all this is possible.
Well, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, joins us now from Moscow. And Dominic, we've heard again from President Putin in the last hour on state TV.
Yeah, we have. Just to update you on those talks, though, the word we're getting from Kyiv, from the Ukrainian president's office, being quoted by Ukrainian media, is saying we now know what the Ukrainian delegation, those talks with the Russians have been asking for. They have used those talks, the beginning of those talks, to demand the removal of Russian forces from Ukraine, but also from Donbass and from Crimea. So a pretty assertive start to Ukraine's opening salvos at those negotiations. Yes, but as you say, Vladimir Putin has been lashing out this morning in comments relayed by his spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, in the Kremlin. He has referred to the West as an empire of lies following the sanctions that have been imposed on his country. And he's also been talking about the reasons why he put his nuclear deterrence forces, so nuclear missiles, on increased readiness, something he's now stepped up to combat readiness. It's been reported in the last hour or so. Now, he is blaming that directly on, or his spokesperson is directly on comments made by Liz Truss, suggesting that NATO might be on a collision course with Russia. And a bit more has come out of that since. The quote is saying that, in the opinion of British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, the Ukraine situation might eventually develop into a conflict with NATO unless the actions of Russia were stopped. That is most likely referring to comments that the Foreign Secretary made to Trevor Phillips on Sky News over the weekend when she said this: if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, we are going to see others under threat, the Baltics, Poland, Moldova, and it could end up in a conflict with NATO. So what the Kremlin is saying is that Vladimir Putin or his aides were listening to those words, felt that that could be pointing to the possibility of conflict between NATO and Russia, and that's why he put his nuclear missiles on increased readiness.
OK, Dominic, thank you. Well, the UN's Secretary-General has warned that the escalation of Russia's military operations in Ukraine is leading to rising human rights violations in the country. During a recorded speech at the opening of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Antonio Guterres said that the UN was monitoring the situation and they would support people on the ground.
The escalation of military operations by the Russian Federation in Ukraine is leading to escalating human rights violations. We know the inevitable result of war: civilian casualties, women, children and men forced from their homes, hunger, poverty and huge economic disruption. Conflict is the utter negation of human rights across the board. Freedom of expression is under attack, with reports of journalists and activists arrested. I have consistently called for the end of the offensive and the return to the paths of dialogue and diplomacy. Meanwhile, our human rights monitoring mission in Ukraine is continuing its work, and our humanitarian agencies will step up their operations. We must show all people in Ukraine that we stand by them in their time of need.
The Sky's Laura Bundock joins me now from Brussels. Laura, what help is the EU able to offer?
Well, that's what's been discussed recently in terms of the humanitarian side of things. They're obviously expecting and already seeing thousands and thousands of Ukrainian refugees crossing into bordering countries. So far, the UN estimates over 500,000 have now made that journey, arriving in countries like Poland, Hungary and Romania.
Laura, apologies, there's an issue clearly with the sound on your microphone, so we're going to come away from that and we'll try and return to Laura in a short while. In the meantime, in the last hour, the United States has announced that it's expanding sanctions against Russia's central bank, freezing its assets in the US and banning any Americans from doing business with it. So let's go to Washington and Sky's Sally Lockwood there. So a further tranche of measures, Sally.
Yeah, we were warned over the weekend that the US and its Western allies were planning more measures, and around 7:30 this morning, a little over half an hour ago, the Treasury did announce further punitive measures against Russia already. The White House tweeting in the last 20 minutes that the US, along with its allies, are preventing Putin from accessing his war chest with new measures. Of course, that announcement from the Treasury of more sanctions on Russia's central bank, which will ban Americans from doing any business with the bank and freezing any assets it holds in America. On top of that, the US is also adding another Putin ally to the sanctions list. That, of course, on top of the already deep sanctions announced by President Biden last week, and that decision to remove several Russian banks from the SWIFT interbank messaging system over the weekend, one of the most drastic measures that the West could impose on Russia in terms of punishing it financially. But another announcement we've also had from Secretary of State Antony Blinken already this morning, that America will suspend its operations at its embassy in Belarus, in Minsk, with immediate effect. And it's authorised the voluntary departure of non-emergency staff and family members from its embassy in Moscow. That announcement as well in the last hour. Certainly, America is keeping its focus on sanctions when it comes to dealing with Putin, and perhaps a strategic silence as well from President Biden over the weekend after that rather shocking announcement from the Russian president that he was going to put his nuclear forces on high alert. Now, Joe Biden had two options. He could have either responded and done the same or chosen to ignore President Putin, which is what has happened so far, Joe Biden choosing instead to de-escalate. But it has led to a response from the UN Security Council, who voted to hold a very rare special session, which will begin in just under 2 hours from now, ahead of a vote on a resolution expected on Wednesday on Russia's behaviour and decision to invade Ukraine. Now, this is only the 11th time since 1950 that the UN General Assembly has held such an emergency session. Now, that will come ahead of that vote on Wednesday, which will criticise Russia and call for this war to end. Now, of course, this is just words. Will Putin care? Will he listen? Well, it's really, of course, just designed to further isolate Vladimir Putin on the world stage. But, of course, that announcement for him over the weekend from him putting his nuclear forces on high alert is, of course, in the forefront of American security officials' minds over this side of the Atlantic, of course, all too aware of how this situation could escalate into a direct standoff between superpowers.
OK, Sally, thank you very much. A little bit more information coming out of Russia in the last few moments. There have been a number of air bans that the Russian authorities had put on various countries in retaliation for those countries banning their airlines. This has now been extended to 36 countries. Russia's banned airlines from 36 countries, including Britain, Germany, Spain, Italy and Canada, from using Russian airspace in a retaliatory move. Now, the UN says more than 400,000 Ukrainians have fled their homeland and the EU is braced for millions more to enter the bloc. Let's talk now to our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, joins us now from the Polish border with Ukraine. They are still continuing to stream across, aren't they, Adam? What's the latest?
Yeah, the guess is that about maybe 500,000 people have already left Ukraine, and more than half of them, probably going for 300,000, have come here to Poland. As a good example, have a look at this. This is what we're seeing a lot of. You see here lots of women and children, and in the heart of this, a big pile of their personal possessions. These people have come in on a bus just crossing the border this morning. And like so many others, they've come to this processing centre. The system is you come across the border, often after an incredibly arduous journey. We hear people telling us spending days getting to the border. You come to this processing centre. Now, we were here yesterday, and I have to tell you that the whole mood of this place has changed quite subtly, because yesterday there was a lot of goodwill around this place. Plenty of people arriving from Ukraine, and they had places to go to. They had family members meeting them. It feels today as if this is turning rapidly much more into the sort of refugee processing facility that you might get in Calais or Lampedusa or something in Lesbos. Far more people who are milling around, who don't seem to have a plan of where to go to. And I have to say, we can't take you inside here, but this is because we've been asked not to film in there. People who own this building don't want us going in there. But in there are hundreds of people who are using camp beds, and lots of them are men. And we didn't see so much of that yesterday. And almost all of them are non-Ukrainians. So I was in there half an hour or so ago. There's a queue of maybe 60, 70 people queuing up to try and get some temporary papers. And I spoke to a few of them. There were some people there from Uzbekistan, from Mongolia. I spoke to a man who had come from India. He'd been a chef in a restaurant in Odessa. And he said he'd left when he heard explosions. And he then said that he'd got as near as he could to the border, the city of Lviv, just near the border, and had then got stuck in an enormous traffic jam and had walked. And he estimated he'd walked about 30 kilometres in order to get to the border. I have to say, he, like a lot of people here, was absolutely exhausted. Now, Poland has said it will take in all Ukrainians, that it will look after them, that it will give them housing and education, it will give them shelter. But make no mistake that this process is turning quickly, from simply welcoming these people to now Poland, and I think the EU is having to think, in reality, how do you accommodate a humanitarian crisis that is developing, unfolding and growing before our eyes?
Adam, thanks very much. Well, the Russian ruble has fallen to a record low today after sanctions against Russia were tightened still further. Our business presenter Ian King joins me now from the city. What's going on in Russia and their banks?
Well, Jane, the move over the weekend in which the West sought to sanction Russia's central bank is by far the biggest stick yet wielded. We were talking last week, of course, about cutting Russian banks out of SWIFT, the global interbank messaging service that facilitates cross-border payments. Now, that in itself is pretty damaging in that it hinders the ability of Russian banks to make payments or collect payments cross-border on behalf of their clients. But this is far bigger still because it effectively prevents Russia from getting its hands on a large part of the $643 billion cushion that it's built up over recent years to protect itself against the impact of sanctions. So potentially that is a move that could precipitate a financial crisis in Russia. It will certainly lead potentially to more inflation and shortages of goods. And accordingly, as you say, the ruble has fallen very sharply. At one point, it was down by 29% against the US dollar. It's actually recovered a bit as the morning has gone on. It's only about 17% off on the course of the day. It's down some 65% against the dollar over the last 5 years. The Russian central bank has responded by raising its main policy rate, interest rates. They've gone up from 9.5% to 20% today. And in the last few minutes, Jane, the central bank governor in Russia, Elvira Nabiullina, she has been stating the reasons why the central bank acted in the way that it could. She said that it was important to see off inflation, compensate citizens against the damage that inflation would do to their savings. She stressed that all funds held in Russian banks are safe. That's very much a message for domestic consumption. And she's also said that the bank has made efforts that will prevent Russian banks from having to make provisions against potential bad debts, which she says is worth some 900 billion euros. That's worth around 90 billion US dollars as things stand. And she's also pointed out, very interestingly, that Russia has its own internal payments messaging system called FPFS. It's a system that is modelled on SWIFT. And she said if anyone wants to carry on making or receiving payments from Russian entities, they can do so via that service as well. So that's the latest. The oil price, by the way, currently up just above $100 per barrel.
OK, Ian, thank you very much. Well, at 3:30 today, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is going to address the Commons on the latest sanctions against Russia. We will bring that to you live here on Sky News. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the latest edition of the Sky News Daily podcast. Today, Kate McCann is looking at how misinformation is weaponised in war and how journalists work to verify what is real and what isn't. You can subscribe to The Daily wherever you get your podcasts. This is Sky News Today. Coming up, why the Russian advance in Ukraine over the last 5 days appears to have been slower than expected.
Just made their first move and they've gone in firing tear gas.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. There are hundreds of these turbines, there are thousands more across Gansu. That's what's left of the North Tunnel, where the North Koreans exploded 5 nuclear warheads. This is a show of strength at a time when China is more fragile than it has been at any time in recent years. Shrapnel from that explosion, so you can see it littered along all the way. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. The train station and the airport, they're both closed. We're not sure about the roads. We've seen reports that they are being blocked by police, so we're going to try and find a way out of Wuhan. After 5 days stranded here, this is deliverance. We help you understand the world with us. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
Now, it's day 5 of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but the Russian advance has been slower than expected. Let's get more now from the defence and security analyst, Michael Clark, on why that is. So, Michael, first of all, how far have the Russian forces advanced?
Well, when we started this process on Thursday, Jane, we expected these arrows to become pretty long and with curls on them as they encircled their objectives. But they haven't got very far. The fact is the Russian advance has stalled in most places. The places where they've made some progress is down in the south. Berdyansk has fallen to Russian forces. That's the first strategic objective they've really made. But Mariupol, right down there, which should have fallen within hours, is still fighting after 5 days. We don't really know what's going on in Mariupol, but there must be some sort of Alamo playing itself out there. So, very difficult. Kyiv, of course, is the centre.
And what about Kyiv itself? we know that there are troops on their way to Kiev. What's the latest on those?
Well, we know that Russian troops have arrived in northern and west of Kiev. One of the major armoured thrusts from Belarus has got there, but the other thrust coming from Russia, from the northeast, has not made it. They've been held up, and they're held up after 5 days. A major battle went on for Hostomel airfield. The Russians tried to take it with an air assault, was beaten back. As far as we know, the Ukrainians still hold it. And that's critical, of course, because if the Russians had an airfield to work with, they could actually attack Kiev much more easily. They don't seem to have got that. So they do have some real problems because their lines of communication are now quite long. They're being attacked on their lines of communications, but the Ukrainians are fighting with everything they've got. They can't fight forever. The Russians can keep bringing fresh troops in, and there are reports today that fresh Russian troops are moving to the Belarusian border. They might well send them down the column that they have got open to try to encircle Kiev in the near future.
So it does seem that the Russian advances has stalled. Where does that leave President Putin in terms of options?
It leaves President Putin having to choose what sort of weapons to use. I mean, we've had this footage in of what looked like a pattern of cluster munition explosions in Kharkiv. These sorts of weapons are devastating in civilian areas, not to mention illegal. President Putin may have to decide how brutal he is prepared to be in this case. The Ukrainians are saying, we're going to peace talks in Belarus. We'll talk as if we are not fighting, and we'll fight as if we're not talking. But President Putin seems to be facing the choice as to whether he goes negotiating or goes brutal. And I guess he hasn't really had to face that choice for a very long time.
OK, Michael, thanks very much. Really interesting analysis. Let's just bring you some breaking news out of Downing Street. Let's cross live to Westminster and our chief political correspondent, John Craig.
The Prime Minister is stepping up his diplomatic efforts as well as all the sanctions and military aid for Ukraine. Number 10 has just announced that the Prime Minister will travel to Estonia and Poland tomorrow for meetings with his counterparts and the NATO Secretary General. The Prime Minister has been making it very clear, we're told, that we do not want to unnecessarily inflict damage on the Russian people, many of whom are bravely taking to the streets to protest this violence, this invasion. But the measures we're introducing and large parts of the world are introducing are to bring down the Putin regime. Now, they say they're not seeking regime change, talking about how they stop Russia seeking to subjugate a democratic country. Now, the PM is going to speak to the Polish president this afternoon ahead of his visit. Cabinet has met this morning. The Prime Minister told his colleagues it's becoming clearer with each day that President Putin has made a colossal mistake, believing the guns of his tanks would be garlanded with roses, when instead the Ukrainian people have put up a fierce resistance in defence of their homeland. Mr Johnson said the latest intelligence suggested Putin's advances had been hampered by logistical problems and the heroic efforts of the Ukrainian military, who were inflicting significant casualties on the Russian troops. He also said, this is the Prime Minister talking to the Cabinet, that President Putin had underestimated Western unity. Went on to talk about the ruble falling, inflation. On the the government is acting in three main areas: economically, diplomatically and militarily. On the economic front, the UK is going to continue to lead efforts to go further, calling for Russia to be cut out of SWIFT completely. That's a step further than is happening so far. He said further sanctions on Russian businesses will be introduced shortly, and the aim is to prevent the Chancellor's announced the unprecedented step of preventing the central bank of the Russian Federation from deploying foreign reserves. Finally, militarily, the UK decision to provide defensive military capability to Ukraine early on had been vindicated, and also there's more news to come, according to Number 10, on visas. On Russia today, the government says politicians don't decide what media are able to broadcast. That's for Ofcom. And on sanctions, we believe that the sanctions are having an impact. There'll be a further update from Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary in the House of Commons, on 3:30 this afternoon. The other development this afternoon is that the PM speaking to the Polish president ahead of a trip. This is Boris Johnson going to Estonia and Poland tomorrow for meeting with his counterparts and the NATO Secretary General.
Thanks very much. You're watching Sky News. A day after handing over stewardship of Chelsea, it's been revealed that Roman Abramovich is involved in the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, just a day after handing over stewardship of Chelsea, it's been revealed that the football club's owner, Roman Abramovich, is involved in the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Our sports correspondent Tom Parmenter is live at Chelsea's stadium, Stamford Bridge. What's this all about, Tom?
Well, from the pictures that we've seen so far from those meetings that have been happening on the border between Belarus and Ukraine, it's not immediately apparent that Roman Abramovich is there, but we are certainly told that he has been involved in the process of those talks and is being something of a conduit between the two sides. We understand that the contact came through a Ukrainian film producer called Alexander Rodyansky, and they were effectively trying to find someone on the Russian side or with deep Russian connections who would be able to facilitate these talks and try to act as a bridge, and Mr. Abramovich is the one who has volunteered to do that. A spokesman for the Chelsea owner has said, "I can confirm that Roman Abramovich was contacted by the Ukrainian side for support in achieving a peaceful resolution, and that he has been trying to help ever since. Considering what is at stake, we would ask for your understanding as to why we have not commented on either the situation as such nor his involvement." And it comes just a day or two after he stepped back from the ownership, or from the stewardship, certainly, of the club, not the ownership yet, but he has certainly moved his attention away from running Chelsea. This is the man, of course, who has ushered in the most successful period the club has ever known. But his focus is very much now on trying to help and do what he can. And the Ukrainian side have admitted that his role and capabilities may be limited, but he is there as a willing participant trying to broker a peace deal. So one of the more surprising developments today on the international side of the football connection to this story and the manoeuvres that have been happening against Russian teams. We know that the English FA have been confirming to our colleagues at Sky Sports News today that they have expressed their request to FIFA that the Russian men's team is kicked out of the World Cup, and also that the Russian women's team is not allowed to take part in the Euros that are due to take place in the summer. So a lot happening within the world of sport connected to the crisis in Ukraine. And Roman Abramovich, perhaps an unlikely figure, but certainly someone who is directly now involved in those talks that have been ongoing, and we will wait to see exactly what influence he can bring to bear in what is a very grave situation.
OK, Tom, thank you very much. Some breaking news now. One of Britain's biggest fund managers has been left unable to sell its shareholding in the Russian state oil giant amid restrictions on foreign share trades on Moscow's stock exchange. Let's cross live to London and our city editor, Mark Kleinman. Mark, tell us more.
Yeah, that's right, Jane. It's just an interesting development on the news that we had over the weekend about BP's plan to sell its huge shareholding in Rosneft, the Russian state oil giant. Now, I understand that a number of UK-based fund managers have been trying to offload their own positions in this Russian state-backed company, but have been unable to do so because of restrictions that have been placed on foreign share trades on the Moscow Stock Exchange. Now, this fund manager in particular, Aberdeen, holds a relatively modest stake in Rosneft. It's worth just £5 million, but it had decided to sell these shares as soon as Russia's invasion of Ukraine took place, and it's been left holding that position, and there's no clue as to when and if it may be able to get rid of it in the near term. It's just an interesting example of how the crisis in Ukraine is manifesting itself in the City of London in unexpected ways. A number of other fund managers in the city are also keen to sell their positions in Rosneft, but are in the same situation as Aberdeen. We may hear more in the coming days if and when those restrictions on foreign share trades on the Moscow Exchange are lifted or are altered in some way, Jane.
OK, Mark, thanks very much. This is Sky News Today. Coming up, as the UN announces that more than 500,000 refugees have fled Ukraine, we'll ask a spokesperson for the organisation what help is being offered to those who flee.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
I'm Greg Milam, Sky's US correspondent here in Los Angeles. I've seen the dark side of America.
Well, President Putin's war in Ukraine is no means universally popular. Back in Russia, there were protests throughout the country across the weekend. And joining us now from Moscow is Tikhon Tsiadko, the editor-in-chief of TV Rain, the only independent news channel in Russia. Really good to talk to you today. How easy are you finding it to report what is happening in Ukraine?
First of all, thanks for having me here. No, it's not easy at all. It's not easy at all because the Russian government is trying to cut off all the information, and there are several restrictions. And already several websites in Moscow were blocked by the government, and a lot of people here in Moscow, they are afraid that it is just the beginning and that the media outlets will be shut down. And it's really hard to get information about how Russian so-called operation is going. We almost don't have information about deaths of Russian soldiers. We don't have information about deaths of civilians. What we have from Russian government is just 2 or 3 videotapes per day by the spokesman of Russian Ministry of Defense, and that's it.
And how many people are able to see your output in Russia, do you think?
Well, I don't know exactly because we are being broadcasted on several platforms, and it's the easiest way is to count the number of viewers on YouTube. And on YouTube, it's something like 20 to 25 millions of views per day. So the interest and the audience now is pretty huge.
And what steps have the Russian government taken to try to alter your content?
Well, they released a statement saying that all the information which is not official information posted by Ministry of Defense could be designated as fake information. And in Russian law, there is an article against fake information. The media could be blocked for posting fake information. So every minute we are waiting whether we will receive a letter from state officials about block of our website or not. But the only way for us not to get mad is not to think about it and just go straight with our work.
Are you, though, concerned for the safety of your employees?
Of course. No one knows what will happen here in a minute. Look, listen, 5 days ago, on Wednesday, we lived in a different, not the country, in a different world. I had plans. My friends had plans. I was going to travel somewhere, etc., etc. Now the world, unfortunately, had changed so much that you cannot be sure in anything, and in your security as well.
Are you able? Do you have reporters in Ukraine able to bring you reports independently?
Yes, we have one reporter on the west of Ukraine now in Lviv.
And you've been able to broadcast from them pretty successfully?
Yes, I just saw her story from there on air. Yeah.
And what about the protests that we've seen inside Moscow? The images that we've had from Moscow today, aside from the images of President Putin, have been images of queues for people trying to get money out of cash machines. And also over the past few days, we've seen some images of protesters concerned about the war who are being taken away by the authorities. Is that very much what is happening on the street?
Well, if you compare the situation now and the situation in 2014, when there was an annexation of Crimea, these two situations are completely different. In 2014, there really was huge support among the Russian population. Now, we don't know because as in every authoritarian state, it's hard to have a sociology here in Russia. But I am pretty sure that this war is not supported as much as annexation of Crimea was supported. But at the same time, you have to understand that the society in Russia is depressed. Last year was really hard for Russian civil society, for a Russian independent society. The leader of opposition, Alexei Navalny, is in jail. All his structures are destroyed. Some of his supporters in jail, or they were forced to leave the country. They over last year, they designated as foreign agents a lot of media outlets and independent journalists. They closed a lot of NGOs. For example, just today, one of the main Russian NGO, Memorial, was destroyed by the court. So people are depressed. People are afraid of going out in the streets. That's why there is not a lot of people out there. But still, people are ready to protest because I think, not the majority of them support this crazy war.
Well, it's astonishing to see those images of people risking their lives going out there and protesting. Tikhon Dyadko from TV Rain, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Well, the United Nations Refugee Agency says now that more than 500,000 people have crossed into neighbouring countries from Ukraine. Matthew Saltmarsh joins me now from Geneva. He's a spokesperson for the agency. And just give us the latest, if you could, Matthew, on the figures. Are the majority of those coming across the border into Poland?
That's right. As you mentioned, the latest figures that we have are for about 500,000, although we would stress that those figures have been rising hour by hour and day by day, so we can expect those to keep rising throughout the course of the day. The majority of those have gone into Poland, although, of course, there are significant numbers that have gone to Moldova, to Romania, to Hungary and to Slovakia as well.
And what facilities are available for these people as they cross these borders?
Well, as you've been hearing, there's obviously a lot of congestion and it's very difficult to get across the borders. So the people arriving are exhausted. Many of them have travelled for many hours, if not days, to get there. When they get over there, obviously it depends country by country, and it is those countries in Europe that are leading this response. We, the UNHCR and our UN partners, are supporting them, and we're ready to help more if needed. But I think you're talking in the first instance about basic reception, so putting people up, giving them a roof over their heads, making sure they've got food, warm clothes, because of course it's cold, water and medical attention if it's needed. You're talking about the very basics at this stage.
And are there issues with those without Ukrainian passports when they get across the border?
Well, we've seen some reports of there being difficulties getting across the border. And of course, we would urge that anyone who has protection needs, anyone who needs that safety should be allowed across the border. But we haven't heard yet of there being problems with people who have got across the border already.
What can governments do? What are you hoping that European governments will do now? Because, of course, the numbers are going up all the time. This could be an extraordinary number of people, couldn't it?
It could be. I mean, we within the UN are forecasting maybe or expecting or planning for, I would say, 4 million. The EU has said that figure could be higher. So the EU is now currently talking about that, and they're considering whether to give some kind of longer-term status to those who arrive from the Ukraine. We would welcome that, of course, because it makes the management of the situation much easier. But I think in the longer term, of course, there are questions of reception, of where people go, of which countries they go to. And so far, those questions haven't been broached because it's very early still in this crisis.
Well, that is the key, isn't it? Because helping those people for 24, 48 hours is one thing, but settling 4 million people around the whole of Europe is entirely different, isn't it?
That's right, and that's a question we know that the EU are looking at this week. But in terms of us and the UN, we will be putting out ourselves an appeal with our partners in the next couple of days, and this will focus inside the Ukraine, where, as you know, access is very difficult at the moment, but also outside the country, in the neighbouring countries. And this will be an appeal to the international community for financial support to help those refugees and those who are displaced within the country as well.
Does it make a difference that for many of these people coming across, they are leaving and they hope it is only a temporary leave? Does that change the way that they are treated in any way?
It's very hard to answer that question. I mean, people leave because they have to leave. And I think many of them leave, of course, hoping dearly that it will be a very short stay. It's really impossible to answer that question at this stage because so much depends on the nature of the war, whether, as we hope, there will be some form of peace negotiations and the guns can fall silent. But unfortunately, in many refugee crises around the world, they do become protracted and people don't often go back as quickly as they want to. Obviously, we all hope that there can be a solution and that people can go back soon, but often that's not the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, indeed. Really interesting to talk to you, Matthew Saltmarsh, spokesperson for the UK, for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's just take you across to Kyiv, where the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, has been speaking in the last few minutes.
About Ukraine, the expectation of the war, the whole world, all of the Ukrainians heard that President Putin is denying us the right to existence, in the same way as the Nazis did not give the Jews the right to existence. President Putin does not offer the Ukrainians to coexist with his identity, with his state. That's why we will not surrender. We understand that for us, this is a matter of survival. Whether it's Reznikov's, Zaluzhny, Kuleba, or the president's opinion, it's not about the surname. It's about this war being our war for existence. We are receiving humanitarian help and political help, not just from the Western countries, but from some Gulf countries. It's not just the Gulf, but Asian countries. That help is getting through to us. It is true that the countries of those regions are not currently helping us with arms that we need to fight the aggressor. They are finding other ways to help us. And we are very grateful to them for it. And the myth that is also forced upon you that the US and anyone else in the NATO bloc do not need Ukraine, it's also a lie. They are with us now. Look at the number of countries who have joined and supported and are supporting the resolution of the UN General Assembly. It's not just the US, it's not just the NATO countries, it's not just the West. There are many countries from around the world. Each of them is finding a way to support Ukraine, and we're grateful to them. A question from a Latvian Russian-speaking edition. The volume is low. Well, this is crazy. The question was about nuclear weapons. That is crazy. That will bring the world into catastrophe. If what President Putin is doing now, the war he started, is the attack on the global order, then the use of nuclear weapons will become an attack against the humanity altogether. So we have to prevent it at any cost.
Well, that there, the Ukrainian foreign minister speaking, obviously translated there, comparing President Putin to a Nazi in terms of his denial of Ukraine's right to exist, and stressing that, in his words, we will not surrender, that the US is with us now, and is also pointing out that they've received humanitarian support from some Gulf and Asian countries, although they haven't helped with arms. He says they've been able to help us in other ways. Let's go look at the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
England and Wales will see prolonged rain today, while the windy northwest will have sunshine and showers. It'll be quite mild, but there'll be a chilly breeze and coastal gales in the northwest. Southeast England will stay mainly dry through the second half of the afternoon, but the rest of England, Wales and southeast Scotland can expect prolonged rain for a time. Scotland and northern England will see the rain giving way to a scattering of showers later. Elsewhere, there'll be a mix of sunshine and showers, but the showers will become increasingly confined to northern Scotland. Rain over England and Wales will mostly clear overnight, but drizzly outbreaks will linger over southeast England. Elsewhere, there'll be just a few showers for northern Scotland. It'll be mild in the south, quite frosty elsewhere with the odd fog patch possible. Tuesday will be mostly fine, but southern England will be dull and drizzly, while the southwest will see heavier rain moving in later. Northern Scotland can expect some wintry showers. It's going to be mild but cooler than today.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we'll have the very latest live as negotiations begin, despite reports dozens have been killed in a rocket attack in the city of Kyiv.